understand the arrest of Jesus, the crowds we see are incited to choose Barabbas over Jesus. Barabbas was not just a murderer, but he was a rebel, and he was slated to die for insurrection. And what Rome did was that they crucified people that were insurrectionists. And Jesus, we'll see, is later killed by Rome for insurrection. And as a rebel, as king of the Jews, that's what they did. That was the charge that Jesus died under. Now, I want us to remember that Mark's gospel was written down shortly after the Jewish War, which was 66 to 70 A.D. in their CE. As we look at that, those years, Jerusalem had actually revolted against Rome and overthrown the Roman government and was free for a period of time. And then Rome finally got together and got enough forces to go and put down the uprising. And there was a siege on Jerusalem. And as the siege finally broke, the Roman forces went in and slaughtered many, many people. They said over 1 million people were likely killed at Jerusalem, and all the walls were torn down, and the temple was razed. And so Mark was written after that occurrence, and it's important that we look at this gospel in light of this particular passage. We see that the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple is kind of woven throughout this passion narrative. The Jewish people have made a choice here. The choice is between Jesus of Nazareth, is the Son of the Father, or Barabbas, which ironically is a Hellenized version of the name Bar Abba, which stands for Son of the Father. Now, interestingly enough, there are several ancient manuscripts where Matthew's version of the Passion names him as Jesus Barabbas. Jesus was a fairly common name in that day. You may not have known, and so we have, do you want Jesus of Nazareth, Son of the Father, or do you want Jesus, Son of the Father, who was this insurrectionist? So in a sense it's saying, which Messiah will you choose? The insurrectionist who leads by violence, or the rabbi who heals people and casts out demons, but also eats with sinners? Now Mark is showing the world that in a sense Jerusalem has made their bed and they lie in it because they chose all along to go the route of violence. He's saying in a sense, those who live by the sword die by the sword. So by this choice, by embracing the hatred of the Romans, the people in a sense have chosen idolatry. The people have chosen to set the side of revenge and hatred for the Romans over what Jesus teaches about love and forgiveness. Now, idolatry is the worship of idols, and it's at the top of the list of 10 commandments. Have no other gods before me, and make no graven images. And as we think about that, we think, well, that one's an easy one to obey for us. But also, what we understand is that idolatry can also be defined as extreme admiration, love, or reverence for something or someone. And so, in a sense, all of us practice idolatry from time to time. Could we put our own emotions of vengeance over what we know to be good or right? And I would say that sometimes we often do. Is this the reason that we would choose Barabbas, violence and revenge, over Jesus, love and forgiveness? It's difficult for us to choose the good when we've been taught to look out for number one. I find that I have the same problem along with everybody else. Now, I had a soccer game yesterday. It was not me playing, fortunately. David was playing in this game, and during the game I was enjoying watching him on the field. He's a good athlete. He's making a play, and he knocks this other boy down that's on the opposing team. It was incidental contact. They're going after the ball. It wasn't intentional or anything like that. But the kid gets knocked to the ground. But in the course of the action, the other team has the ball and they're moving into scoring position. And what I notice is that David pauses. The referees did not stop the game for this kid on the ground. But David pauses to check on the fallen opponent. And I can remember saying, that boy's going to be fine. Get back on defense, David. And Cheryl was standing next to me, and she quietly commented, it's okay if he responds with kindness, even during a game. Of course, she was right. It was the thrill of competition stoked something in me that I didn't even care if the opponent was on the ground. And, you know, he wasn't seriously hurt. Otherwise, they would have stopped the game. Wouldn't they? Yeah. How would they know if he was or wasn't? One of our former bishops, it was the Bishop of Mississippi, Jack Metters, tells about a story about an incident that happened during the Special Olympics. And it seemed as if there were 9 children lined up for a race for Special Olympics. And, you know, the gun went off and they all started. And as they were moving along, all of them running and excited toward the finish line, one of them tripped and fell about 10 yards in. And he started crying and bemoaning the fact that he had fallen. And the other kids did not pursue towards the finish line. They stopped. And one little girl with Down syndrome went and picked him and helped him up. And she kissed him. And she brushed him off. And then all of the kids kind of gathered around him and kind of encouraged him. And they all linked arms. And they finished the race all together, crossing the finish line together. And everybody in the stands stood and applauded. It's as if they didn't understand that we're supposed to be in competition with one another, and I'm supposed to beat you, and I should take advantage of the fact that you're on the ground. Because those who fall by the wayside and fall behind, we are instinctively taught to move ahead of. But these children somehow grasped and gave to the world an understanding for a brief moment of what the kingdom of God is like. And they challenged the world's concept that first place for me is everything. You know, this race that we're all in, that we're all on, is important. But it's not just important for me, and it's not just important for you. The gospel of Jesus seems to be teaching us something else, and sometimes we can grasp a hold of it when we look at the fallen and those who are on the outside. Sometimes we do stop whatever it is we're doing, and we pause, and we pick them up. And we find that we have gained true life. We find that maybe in this moment, this little moment, we have chosen Jesus over Barabbas. Now, as children, we should all honor our parents. We all realize this. Especially when you become a parent. If you become a parent, you realize honoring your parents is very important. Because you try to instill this in your children. And what you try to instill is this idea that I hope that you will do a better job than I've done, in this. And you try to, I want you to really get this better than me, better than I've done. Because there's times when we still have our parents with us that we should probably be spending more time with them than we do. But, you know, the self, we have all these things to do, and it seems to come first, and we seem to put those things ahead of what is sometimes more important. There was a Jewish man, Morris. He called his son in New York, and he had some terrible news to break to him. He said, "Son, I want to tell you something shocking, and there's no easy way to say this, so I'm going to come right out and say it. I'm divorcing your mother." And of course, the son is shocked. He's appalled. He said, "I don't understand. My mind can't get a hold of this. You're doing what?" He said, I'm divorcing your mother. I really don't want to talk about it. I don't want to get into it on the phone, but my mind is made up. I'm not going to do that." He says, "Dad," he said, "you and Mom have been together 54 years. You can't just get divorced. What happened?" He said, "Oh, son, it's just too painful to talk about. But I wanted to call you and let you know you're the oldest, and if you'd really help me out, I want you to call your sister and let her know as well, and it'll spare me the pain of dealing with that with her." And he said, "Well, Dad," I just don't get this." He said, "Where's Mom?" He said, "Put Mom on the phone. Let me talk to her about this." He said, "Your mother's not here right now." And he said, "You can't talk to your mother." He said, "I haven't told her yet." He says, "But I've agonized over this and I've come to a decision, and so I've made an appointment with the lawyer the day after tomorrow." And he says, "Dad, don't do anything until I get there. I'm going to take the first flight down, and I'm going to see you there. Don't do anything." He says, "Well, all right." He says, "Next week is Yom Kippur. I'll hold off on seeing the lawyer until after that. Just call your sister, break the news to her. I just can't bear to talk about it anymore." So a little later, Morris, the man, gets a call from his daughter, and she says, your brother, your son, my brother and I are both, we've made flights, we've got, all our children are coming, we're all coming down to see you. We're going to be arriving in Florida the day after tomorrow. Don't do anything until after we get there." And so Morris promised his daughter, "I'll hold off until you arrive, we'll talk about it." And he hangs up the phone, and Morris turns to his wife and said, "Well, it worked this time. But we're going to have to do something better to come up and get them there for Passover." Now, we know we should spend more time with our parents. It's the right thing to do. But we find ourselves in life choosing Barabbas over Jesus, even in regards with this, because, we've got all kinds of reasons. And I could go into them for you, but you've got the same ones. When the self towers over the interests of others, we fall into idolatry. It's not what God would have us do. But we seem to slip into this time and time again, as if almost as we can't even help it or don't even think about it. Now, I like to ski. Any skiers here? A few? We got a few people right there. Well, I like to do that. I don't do it near often enough, but I like it when I can get it. I learned to ski when I went skiing at New Haven Methodist Church. I was a youth minister. I'd never skied before, but they had a regular habit of going on these trips during spring break. And so I went on my first ski trip with them. We planned it and organized it, went down. I learned to ski, did the ski plow where you kind of lock your knees together and it agonizes the thighs, as you learn to do that. Later, I learned to ski better when I tried to keep up with the youth who were really good. And then you just kind of end up on slopes that you have no right being on, and you just think, well, I better get down it. There's no other way, as down is it. And so you learn that way. I learned to do that, and it was wonderful. I'd go every year, and it was always fun. I enjoyed really bonding with those youth who were really good skiers. So on my last year, we had a great trip, and a huge crowd went, and I was there with some of the youth, and the first morning, I was hitting the slopes, and it picked it up again, and we were doing some pretty tough stuff, and it was a lot of fun. I was really enjoying it. And all of our rookies, the newbies who'd never skied before, were in ski school that morning. And so they were learning the ski plow, and all that kind of stuff, and getting it, and that afternoon, they were done with ski. They said they graduated and said, "You're done." whether they knew how to ski or not. You know, they were done. We've had enough of you. You go off and learn. And they took him up to the top of the slope. All of us went together. The top of this big green hill. And green is the easiest slope to get down. And they deposited us at the top of this hill, and off we went. But I noticed, out of all the newbies, I was kind of checking on them and making sure they kind of had it. And everybody was doing pretty good, and they were making their way down, not too much of a problem, except for one little girl. And she was traumatized. You saw the deer in the headlights look, you know, she saw the hill down. And she looked at that and she thought, I'm never going to get down that. And so I saw myself turning into a ski instructor during the afternoon session. I didn't want to be a ski instructor. I looked wistfully at those youth who really knew what they were doing. And I wanted to go with them. And I kind of saw with sadness that they made their way on to the harder slopes. Kind of wave at them, you know. And I turned to the girls like, okay, let's see what we can do. And we began to work down that hill. Linda Harker was on that trip. She's now the senior pastor at McFarland United Methodist Church down in Norman. And Linda was the children's minister, and she also had youth, and she was good enough to see this and stay. And so we both began to work with this girl down. And as I worked and coached her, I began to kind of ski back. I'd kind of look at her and ski backwards a little bit, and she'd kind of come down. And then the other one of us would race down the hill, come up the gondola and race, and then come back to us, and then we'd take turns helping her down the hill. And we did this all the way down that slope, and it took a long time to get us down. But the amazing thing that I noticed was that as I was skiing and coaxing her down, I was becoming much more comfortable with my time on the hill and the way I was holding myself and positioning myself. And pretty soon I learned I was skiing backwards. Now, I didn't know how to ski backwards, but I learned that day, I learned how to ski backwards. I never would have learned or picked up that trader skill if I had trotted off after those kids that I wanted to go after. But I stayed and did the right thing, even though reluctantly, stayed and did what was right, and I grew. And I wonder about that example. That when we don't focus on ourselves so much, when we look at the other and say, how can I help that person? We find ourselves growing spiritually in ways that we didn't anticipate. And it's amazing how God works in that fashion in our lives. That when we can just blind ourselves to the self, even if just for a moment, and we begin to notice what's going on around us, that we begin to see God. It's a time I really wanted to choose Barabbas. But I did choose Jesus that day. I think when we do this, we find that we've chosen life. As we look at our lives, how many choices do we have come to us even in a single day? And what would it look like if we really thought about those choices? What if we even began to pray about even some of the small choices, just a little prayer for our lives each and every day? If we can pick true life over the self, even with a few more of our choices on a daily basis, what will our lives begin to look like? What will our families begin to see? What will those around us begin to say? Maybe if enough Christians begin to do this, the world will be forced to sit up and take notice. And the crowds crying out for Barabbas will finally be still. Amen.